They fooled them wouldn't at church Sunday because the clock out there was wound down. I had to wind it up a while ago. So let's not be letting that happen again. We might get in a mess. Yeah. I mean, you could have stopped by and wound the clock anyhow. I mean, that's the least you could do. And, you know, we always expect you to do the least you can do. All right, everything's fine. Everybody's lovely? All right, we're going to talk about a subject tonight that's a little touchy, but we'll get to it in just a jiffy. I wanted to mention just momentarily, Gwen, I hadn't talked to her specifically about it, as school starts back again, she's trying to put together some personal hygiene items, especially for young ladies, for girls at school and so forth. And Debbie and I kind of talked about it a little bit this afternoon. I know there's a lot of people who, you know, kind of overstep their bounds and take advantage of things like that. But that happens, you know, that's not something that we can control. But there's so many, having been there and seen, there's so many of our young ladies and kids that need help in that area. It's kind of difficult to, you know, we can't know which ones, you know, are for real and which ones. I know one of the things that bothered me as I was dealing with some of the kids was the way the parents, it's not that they don't have the money to do things like that, it's just that they don't do it. They spend the money on other things besides their kids and their kids' needs. So, you know, God gives us credit for helping. And you know, we don't have to worry about whether it's abuse or whether it's whatever. But there's some young ladies, especially at school, that need help in that area. So anyway, just thought I'd share that with you if you got a little extra that you want to give Gwen, and I'm sure you could do as I did. You give it to Debbie, and Debbie will see that Gwen gets it. I kind of like to do it sort of through the church in a way because I want them to know it's coming from the church, not that it's coming from me. I like for them to say, hey, you know, New Salem, God help me out through the New Salem church. So, but you do it the way you want to. If you got a little cash money that you want to hand, I'm sure Larry would be glad to give it to her, or Debbie, you know, just any way you want to handle it. But if you want to help out a little bit when school starts back, that's a real need that will start back with it. All right. We could discuss religion for ever so long. Sandra and I was talking about the artificial intelligence mess that's happening now, and all of the junk that's going to be attached to all of that, and the Antichrist, how he's going to use that, and how that's going to be a very big part. In fact, I honestly believe that it's one of the next major steps that leads to the tribulation period being ushered in. But when you think about true religion, that's what James talks about in our lesson tonight in James chapter 1, verses 26, 27. He talks about what is true religion. Now, I don't particularly like the word religion in a way, though it's a good word that a lot of people use, and they kind of reference it in that way. And you know, it's here. We're going to read the word right here out of God's word tonight, but religion is not what saves you. Christianity is not a religion. It's a relationship. Always keep that in mind. We are not, as Christians, we're not here to set up or promote some kind of religion, but we're here to help others to see a relationship with Christ. So what is it that's really what we would consider a true religion, or one that's acceptable to God, I guess is the best way I know to put it. So we start with verse 26, James chapter 1, verse 26. If any man among you seem to be religious, and bridleth not his tongue, but deceiveth his own heart, this man's religion is vain. Pure religion and undefiled before God and the Father is this, to visit the fatherless and widows in their affliction, and to keep himself unspotted from the world. As you know, I hope you know, I'm sure you do, New Salem is affiliated with the Southern Baptist Convention. Some call that a religion per se. To us, it's not a religion. It's a tool that we support the missionaries on the foreign fields. It's a excellent, outstanding, wonderful idea that in all other denominations or faiths of people who send out missionaries, generally the missionaries have to go, from church to church or individual to individual, raising their own money to get overseas and so forth. And sometimes we support missionaries that way, such as the Reverend Victor that came to be with us from overseas in Uganda. We always like to support him. About once a year he'll come through and talk to us, and he's doing a great work over there. And so, at that point, we help support him. So it's not that we, I guess you'd say, limit, because we support Eagles Wings and other things throughout the year. But none of that is what I consider religious work. To me, it's just something that the church ought to do. The Southern Baptist Convention has what we call a cooperative program, and what that means is that money that we give could go into the cooperative program, and then that money is used to give these missionaries an income, take care of them overseas, where they don't have to worry about running around and raising their own money. To me, it's a good idea. God has obviously supported that. I mean, he's obviously supplied that. And so all of that just to say, we're going to look at what God through James tells us is most important, foremost in God's mind, as far as what the church ought to be doing. So if you look at verse 26, James has already told us not to just be hearers of the word, but to be doers also. Because if you're just a hearer and not a doer, then your religion is in vain. But now he takes it another step. And as God does so wonderfully through James or anybody else, is he gets right to the point. I mean, he lays it out there where it is. And I don't know about you, and I'm not going to criticize any particular religion, faith, denomination, whatever you want to call it. But one of the things, and I'm certain most of you probably have run across this too, is there's a way that some people have of talking like a Christian or talking like a religious person. And they have these catchphrases, these catchwords that they use. Some things that, like in the way they call a brother, fellowship, sharing, things like that kind of fall in there to make it sound Christian or sound religious or whatever. To me, a Christian ought to be themselves, regardless. So whether I'm in this pulpit or whether I'm on Main Street Reform, I'm going to be the same guy as best I know how. I mean, you're not going to, what I am is what you get, and praise God, so far that's been enough. But for some people, I get very suspicious of somebody who's kind of giving me that old religious jargon, trying to sound saintly. It bothers me, and I don't like it. I just be honest with you. It gets under my skin real quickly. So I think what James is doing, what God through James is doing, is touching us, reaching out to us, and saying, here's something that I want you to know. This is about your heart, who you are, and what you're about, and what the church is about. Because to me, when it's talking about seeming to be religious, it sounds like to me he's talking about hypocritical action. Because, you can seem to be religious but not even know what Christ is all about. Church is more than just coming together and singing 2 or 3 songs on Sunday morning and listening to some old preacher that probably don't know as much as you do about the Bible, get up and do his best to share the good news. It's about a lot more than that. And to me, the function of any church, this one most importantly to me, obviously, but is what do we do? What do we do with our resources, money, facilities, whatever it might be that God has given us? What we do with it tells God and the world what we are. And if we are really Christian, then it's going to show. And it's going to show in a couple of ways that James is going to talk about. He's talking about it still on that same theme of doing, of doing. Doing is so important. We can look like, sound like, we can read the Bible through every 2 weeks. We can do all of that kind of stuff that seems religious, but our doing and how we do and why we do is critically important because it defines what we really are. So we're going to look at three things tonight. It's kind of like a three-point message, all right? Because James puts it in there, and I want us to look at it. In verse 26, he starts out, if any man seems to be religious. Now watch him when he cuts through it like knife through hot butter. Seems to be religious, but doesn't bridle his tongue. My goodness. The first dimension of being a Christian, the first thing about being a true, shown up, bona fide, religious in God's eyes, true Christian person, is someone who controls his temperament, controls his tongue, controls what he runs his mouth about. James is kind of like, he brings in that bridle, if not his tongue. It's sort of a horse analogy. I don't know, some of you may ride horses well, and some of you may not. I'm one of those that may not. But if you've ever sat on a horse and you felt that 1,500, 2,000 pounds of muscle and bone underneath you, and you know that booger is well able to do a whole lot more than you can keep him from doing if you don't watch it. So you're going to try to keep him under control. The tongue is much the same way. If that horse decides he's going to jump and run, how you going to stop him? All right, you got a bridle, you got bits in his mouth, you can give it all of that you want to, but if he decides he wants to go jump that fence, you just about going to have to hang on, all right? So the problem then becomes, how do we stop it? Well, we don't let it start. Simple enough, isn't it? But it's the same way with our tongue. Too many times, if we take the bridle off our tongue and we let it get started, we don't know how to stop it. It just gets loose and it goes its own way. The real mark of a true Christian is not his ability to speak, but it's his ability to bridle his tongue, to control his tongue. I don't know about you, but there's been so many times in my life when I've thought, oh, boy, I wish I hadn't said that. You ever done that? Have you ever been able to take it back? Oh, I'm so sorry I take it back. Well, you do the best you can. But truth is, you cannot unspeak it. And that's one of the things when I started preaching many, many years ago that worried me as much as anything else was the control of what I say, especially in the pulpit. I know you've heard people talk about it being a sacred stand. To me, it really is. I mean, to me, it is the spot that should be the most holy spot, not just in the church, but in the world, is that spot where the man of God stands to preach the Word of God. An out-of-control tongue, be it the preacher preaching or whether it's somebody just running their mouth, just talking out in the community, that is number one on God's list, as you can see, of the mark of a true Christian. Being able to control that tongue, being able to hold the tongue and control when it jumps, all right? I heard old Andy say that one day, Andy Griffith. He said, Barney, I think we got her if she don't jump. Well, that's kind of the way it is with our tongues. If we let it jump, it'll get away. It'll get away, and it'll say things and do things that you'll wish to goodness it hadn't done. No matter how much you try to do good works, if you got a tongue that's loose at both ends, you're in trouble, all right? It's just that simple. The test of a true Christian Here's what Jesus had to say about it. And I'm going to paraphrase, but then I'll read you that. What Jesus said to his disciples in teaching them over in Matthew chapter 12. He told them, guys, out of the abundance of the heart, out of the abundance of the heart, out of the heart, a man speaks. Now, what's Jesus saying to them? Here's the paraphrase. Inevitably, Jesus says, what's in your heart's going to come out of your mouth. I hear a lot of people say sometimes, well, if I think it, I'm going to say it. Might as well say it. You better get rid of that idea in a hurry, in a big hurry, because it's going to get you in trouble, okay? I have thought things 1 minute and then thought something else the next. When you find out all the facts, or when you come to know the truth, you're going to find out, boy, sure, I'm glad I didn't say what I thought right then. The tongue is going to let the world know what you're thinking inside. So be careful. Be careful. Don't say it unless it is, number one, for the glory of God. Okay? Is this what I'm about to say going to glorify God in his kingdom? If the person I'm saying it to, when they hear it, is this going to help lead them to a closer relationship with Christ? There's nothing to brag about when you say, if I think it, I'm going to say it. Wrong, wrong, wrong. You're going to get in more trouble with that. You're going to hurt more people and even be hurt yourself, especially when we're under stress, when things are tough. And I mean, can be angry, but not necessarily just anger, but other kinds of stress. When you get tired and you wore down, it's so easy to just let that tongue roll. Don't do that. There was a preacher one day that was working on their church much like we worked on ours. And the preacher had his hammer in his hand. Everywhere he went, this old boy just kept following him. And the preacher finally asked him, said, man, why are you following me? He said, I want to hear what you say when you hit your thumb. He was just waiting, see? He was watching. He wanted to see what was going to happen. A lot of things come out of our mouth that shouldn't. But as Jesus said, if it comes out of your mouth, it came from your heart. It came from where your thinking is. And too many times it can be filth. It can be lying. It can be gossip. It can be junk that you've heard and you don't have a clue whether it's right or not, but it just, Ephesians, Paul said, let no corrupt talk come out of your mouth. That's a big statement. Let no corrupt talk come out of your mouth. How do you know it's corrupt? Well, if you don't know it is or ain't, let it alone. Stay away from it. Don't say it. But one of the biggest things that the Bible continuously harps on is lying. You know, the Bible tells us in the book of Revelation even that all liars will have their place in the fire and will have their place in the place of fire and brimstone. God is strong on that one, so be careful. Ephesians chapter 4 says, therefore, having put away lying, let each one of you speak the truth with his neighbor. Now you say, well, boy, if I told my neighbor the truth, he'd hate me. Well, just don't tell him anything. You know, just let it alone. Keep your mouth shut. But all of these kinds of things, we hear that. How many of you ever heard that old saying that goes in one ear and out the other? You know what the biggest problem we have is that goes in one ear and comes out the mouth. Usually, it's been jumbled up and messed up and changed up from what went in our ears, and then it comes spewing out of our mouth with a whole total different version than when it came to us to begin with. James is pointing to the number one thing, I think, that identifies you honestly, and that is the communication out of your mouth. He says, be so careful. Now, I want to kind of deal with this for just a second because we have to be careful how we paint with that broad brush. Now, we all have fallen into that sin at one point or another in our lives, quite possibly lately, of letting our mouth get ahead of our brain. You know, put our tongue in gear while our mouth still got the clutch mashed. But the problem is, James is talking about, is the habitual act of it. The habitual act. I know that you know, like I do, there's certain folks that if you go to talking to them, the first thing they're going to do They start rolling out all kind of gossip, and then they want you to roll out any gossip you got with them so they can tune it in with their gossip and have something to talk about to somebody else. And trust me, if they'll talk about somebody else to you, they'll talk about you to somebody else. Can I get an amen? That's what I always know. When somebody's telling me some old mess about somebody, I'm thinking, yeah, and as soon as you leave me, you're going to go tell somebody else something about me. But James is just saying, simply put, if that's habitual, don't let it happen. Get it under control. Bridle your tongue. James says it if he thinks he's religious, but doesn't bridle his tongue, then he's lying to himself. He has deceived himself. He has deceived his heart, and his religion is worthless. So give it a good thinking about. John Wesley, I know some of you have heard of John Wesley. He was a great early preacher in the Methodist church. And John Wesley at one time was preaching in a big revival, as he did so many of them all over the place. But as he preached at night, he had on a nice bow tie, and he preached his heart out. And this lady that everybody had known for being a gossip and running her mouth about other people more than she should, and as soon as the service was over, boy, she couldn't wait. She went bounced up there to John Wesley, and she said, John Wesley, the strings on your tie is too long. They bother me. So he just looked around to some of the other ladies. Any of you ladies have a pair of scissors in your purse? Well, one lady did. She reached in and got her little knitting scissors out of her purse and handed them to him, and he handed it to the lady. He said, ma'am, if you don't mind, would you take these scissors and cut those strings where you think they ought to be, the length you think they ought to be? Well, she did. She got it. She snipped them up there pretty short, pretty close. And she said, now, that looks better. He said, okay. So he said, let me have the scissors now. And he said, your tongue is too long for me. Would you please stick it out and let me take care of the extra length? Would I say that to somebody? I kind of doubt it. But one lady came up to John Wesley one time and said, it's my talent to speak my mind. John Wesley said, that's one talent that God wouldn't care if you buried it. That's the truth. We need to bury that old habit. If that's our habit we have, we need to get rid of it. He who keepeth his tongue keepeth his soul. So, the tongue, number one. Second point, number two, what is it? Look at verse 27. This is one that I dearly love because I think you can look back over the years as your pastor and you can say, well, it shows. All right, I hope it does. Pure religion and undefiled before God and the Father is this: to visit the widows and the orphans, to visit the fatherless and widows in their affliction. Now, when we look at that, you say, well, does that mean I got to go out here and go to their home? Well, yeah, if you want to, if you can, that's a good thing. But when the word is actually used here to say to visit the fatherless and the widows, it means to take care of, to help them. Now, in biblical description of a widow, it means a widow that doesn't have anybody. Not just doesn't have a husband, doesn't have children, doesn't have even down to first cousins. In the Bible days, they expected families to take care of each other. In our day, it doesn't seem to be so much so. But to me, if you really want to please God, help somebody. If you really want to please God, help somebody. That applies to me individually. It applies to you individually. But it also applies to church. To me, I am oftentimes, I talked with a preacher the other night who's been a long-term pastor, much like I have. But bless his old heart, he talked to me for 45 minutes. And about all he could talk about was how much their offerings had gone up over the last 5 years since he's been at that church. And they've gone from this to this, and they now pay him so many dollars more than they did. And, and it just went on, how much they got in the bank and all of this stuff. And I know I had to bridle my tongue. I really did. It would have served no purpose whatsoever for me to have told him what was going through my mind. because I just wanted to tell him, man, it's not about how much money you got. It's about how you use the money you got. It's a tool like any other tool, but it's a tool God gives us certainly to provide for his house and certainly the needs of his house, certainly the employees, if you have some, of the church, whatever it might be. But more than that, God intends for his church to take care of folks, to help folks. If you see a need, for goodness sake, don't wait to be begged. Don't wait for somebody to come, and say, watch, see for yourself. And if you see a need, bring it to us. Let's look at it. And I know, people will take advantage of that. I understand that. But we do a pretty good job of screening around here before we put money into somebody's hands. Orphans and widows were the most helpless people in the society back in James's day. Back in the early church days, orphans and widows literally was, the word he uses for affliction here means intense pressure. I mean, you know how it is when you come and you got about 2 weeks more a month than you got income. And things are just, that wears you out, more than anything else. Now, I'm not talking about people who just throw their money away. I'm talking about people who genuinely need help. We got a lot of folks in our community and in our area that need help and wouldn't ask for it if their life literally, they'd eat dog food before they would ask this church for a nickel. There's others that you have to be careful. You have to sift through and make sure that they are truly needy. But God, I believe, tells us what he expects of us when he says, I want you to use your resources. I want you, church, to use your resources to help folks. When there's a need, help folks. Sometimes it may come at you all of a sudden, some not. But if we refuse to help folks in need, then our worship, everything else about us, is just ashes on the altar. It is no good, and it's unacceptable to God if we don't help folks who need help, period. And I despise to hear when somebody says, well, old so-and-so ain't no count with it. Listen, that's not for me to decide. If somebody needs help and they're down and out and we can help them, help them. Because if we don't, God's going to hold us accountable. Plus the fact that we missed such a great opportunity to do his work. Isaiah put it this way, what to me is the multitude of your sacrifices, says the Lord. I've had enough of your burnt offerings, of your rams and the fat of your well-fed beast. I do not delight in the blood of bulls or lambs or goats. Bring no more vain offerings, God said. Incense is an abomination to me. When you spread out your hands, I'm going to hide my eyes from you, God said. Even though you make many prayers, I will not listen. Your hands are full of blood. Wash yourselves. Make yourselves clean. Remove the evil of your deeds from before my eyes. Cease to do evil. Learn to do good. Seek justice. Correct oppression. Bring justice to the fatherless and plead the widow's cause. Isaiah was simply speaking the heart of God in all of that. And I tell you, God's people over the years have had to relearn this lesson over and over and over and over. It disgusts me to see God's people, and I've seen it many times in my lifetime, God's people fussing over what little money God has given to that church. It bugs me to no end. If God has provided it, he provided it to use for his glory. Take care of the church. Take care of the church's needs. But help folks. Be a helping church. Be a church that people all over the world knows that you're going to help folks if you see a need. And that, I'm sound like I'm bragging. I can do that to you right here in this building because you're us, okay? But that's what this church is known for. The church is known for being a helping church. All over the place, all over the county and area. True religion, God says. True religion and undefiled. That means it's always acceptable to God when you take care of folks that needs help. John put it this way over in 1 John chapter 3. If anyone has this world's goods and sees his brother in need, yet closes his heart against him, how does God's love abide in him? Little children, let us not love in word or deed or talk, but in deed and in truth. To me, that's the essence of being a Christian. Opening yourself up, open-handed to the world, helping folks. And I say this, we're not so much here to help programs and the latest schemes somebody can come up with and all that. That's, to me, that's not what helping is all about. What helps is when you put that money or that resource, whatever it might be, directly into the hands of the one who's got that need. Put it there and let them use it. Let them have it. It's a personal thing, but it's a church-wide thing. Acceptable religion before God is when we reach out to help the needs of others. Number 3, and I'm done. To keep oneself unspotted from the world. That's a toughie, number 3. That's a toughie. It ought to be the goal of every one of us in this room right now, to keep ourselves unstained, unspotted from the world. We do a lot of our canning and freezing and stuff down in the shop, and Davine's got an old sheet, and she puts it on top of my workbench. Why do y'all think she wants to cover up my workbench? I've already vacuumed it off, thank you. I've wiped it off a little bit once in a while. It looks pretty nasty. All right. That's right. I mean, you're going to mess it up. All right. That's natural. But what does unspotted mean? As far as a Christian's concerned, unspotted means that you don't know, neither do I, but I can assure you there's a bunch. You don't know how many people there are out there that's looking at you. Like the old man that's following a preacher around, just want to see what you're going to do. And they'll even sometimes approach you with some, I don't know a better way to put it than stupidity, just to see how you'll react. I have it happen to me quite a lot. Want you to get stirred up. Want you to say something, just so they can make an excuse for themselves. Somehow, if getting you to mess up makes their mess ups all right. Yeah, I'm telling you, you got to be careful. The world, they're looking at you. They're watching you every day. Now, whether they get saved or not, that's between them and God. But I don't want to be the one who gave them an excuse not to come to Christ. Our world is so polluted today. So polluted. Our society is so polluted. We're so polluted that we even take perversion and call it gay. Sing Christmas songs about being gay and bright and now it messes it up, you know, because they twist it around and they make it sound, you know, unborn children being slaughtered in their mother's womb, and we call it freedom of choice. Choice for who? I bet you it's not that baby's choice. What you bet you? So what I'm saying is we want to take it and turn it around. Take what is evil and make it sound good. You know what Isaiah said? Isaiah said in the day that evil will be called good, and good will be called evil, and light will be called darkness, and darkness will be called light. Boy, if that's not the age we live in, I don't know what is. When we look at all of these things, three ways that we can show God that we really mean it, that we really mean it. We love being a Christian. We want to be a Christian. We want to live to make Him happy. We need to keep ourselves unspotted, unstained. Don't let the world get in. Don't let evil society get into your mind, because it will destroy it. Do not walk around this old society of ours with your mind wide open. Because an open mind is like an open garbage can. It'll catch every sort of thing that don't need to be in it. Don't do that. Don't do it. It's okay to be closed-minded. Oh, there's so many people out there, well, you just so hard-headed with your mind closed. Sure am. I'm proud of it. Glad I am. I don't mind I don't mind being hard-headed either, but anyway. We need to take God seriously. We need to take James seriously when he says to keep us unspotted from the world. Remember, when you turn on that television and there's that old stinking mess that everybody's promoting on TV nowadays, what do? Turn it or turn it off. We set our kids down in front of that old television, turn that sucker on, and let it just literally indoctrinate their mind just so they won't mess with us and we can go ahead and do what we want to do. What a sacrifice. What a horrible sacrifice. Well, acceptable religion. What is it? 3 things. Keeping a tight rein on your tongue, helping out others when there are others who need help, and keeping yourself cleaned up, unspotted. Don't let it in. Any questions? All right. Well, let's all stand then. Yes? Yeah. Oh, really? Betty Birmingham? Betty Birmingham. Okay, so that's why we hadn't seen her lately. So remember Betty Birmingham in her prayer. Anybody else? All right. Well, I appreciate you making the effort to come out and be with us tonight. Doug, would you dismiss us with a word of prayer?